name is Elizabeth Manns, and I'd like to welcome you to the April 4th Coalition Show. This is the March 6, 2023 edition of the show, and it has been 443 weeks since the closing of the North Adams Regional Hospital. The April 4th Coalition's mission statement is, we are for workers' rights and collective bargaining rights and are against tax breaks for the rich and corporations who ship our jobs overseas. We support all the articles of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but as is our custom, we put the emphasis on Article 23 at the start of the show.
Okay. Number 1, everyone has the right to work, the free choice of employment, the just and favorable conditions of work, and protection against unemployment. Number 2, everyone, without any discrimination, has the right to equal pay for equal work.
Number 3, everyone who works has the right to just and favorable remuneration, ensuring for himself or herself and his or her family an existence worthy of human dignity and supplemented, if necessary, by other means of social protection. Number 4, everyone has the right to form and join trade unions for the protection of his or her interests. And also we give a thank you to Michael Putnam, who currently is still the program director for WMNBLP 107, which is the community radio station, for airing our show on Fridays at 6 p.m., at least the audio portion of it. And of course to the wonderful staff here at NBC, I never get it right, NBCTC TV, and David Fabiano for helping us produce the show. Dick, last week we put the emphasis on the train wreck in East Palestine, Ohio.
Yes.
I always want to say New Palestine.
Yeah.
East Palestine, Ohio. And you found Robert Wright had his take on the incident?
Right. And the reason why we're going to go over it a little bit again is just the impact it has here in North Adams, because we are one of those towns that are on the freight train runs right through the middle of it.
Yeah. In fact, the Berkshire Eagle interviewed people down in Great Barrington who apparently are right on the train track, and it was in this past Saturday's Eagle, the article on that. And before they wondered, like with awe, like or curiosity, and now they're a little bit more worried about what's passing through.
And there was another train wreck in Ohio, no injuries, but there were 25 cars went off today.
Oh, I didn't know that because I've been at work.
Yeah. So anyways, let's, and we also were a force for reopening North Adams Hospital. We want a full-service hospital here in North Berkshire. And again, the origins of that hospital were a train wreck.
Yes, they were.
And
that spelled out the need then.
Yeah, we didn't have the ability to take care of the people that were injured in the train wreck, and the people in the community rose up and said, we need a full-service hospital. And I think we need one too right now.
We need one even more so today. The population's bigger. We still have trains going through with chemicals. All it takes is one of those incidents, and suddenly you're going to have people needing medical attention and not the ability to do so.
Yeah. So why don't we watch this video by Robert Reich on how a corporate greed destroyed a small Ohio town.
A toxic train wreck in Ohio is only the latest tragic example of corporate greed leaving innocent people to pay the price. Deadly chemicals like vinyl chloride spilled out of the wrecked Norfolk Southern train, sickening locals and killing wildlife. It may be years before we know the full extent of the damage. How on earth does something like this actually happen? Major rail companies like Norfolk Southern put off installing modern braking systems on their trains, an investment that might have prevented this disaster. It's not for lack of money. The 7 biggest railroad companies, including Norfolk Southern, collectively spent $191 billion on stock buybacks this past decade. They also chose to spend millions of dollars lobbying politicians in Washington to repeal safety regulations that would have required them to make their trains safer. For too long, corporations have been given the green light to maximize profits, no matter the cost to workers or our communities. We must hold them accountable and demand that they operate in the best interests of everyone, not just their share. Is that really so much to ask?
Not in my opinion. I mean, frankly, it would have taken a fraction of what they spent just lobbying to get their regulations deregulated to do the maintenance on the railroad tracks and hired back enough people on the train
And-
so
and
that
install the new braking systems
System.
too. I think they
would have
need
been
to
a
do that.
fraction of the cost that they spend to avoid doing it,
Yeah.
you know.
I think, I don't know about the cost itself, but I think the cost of what this accident has brought to the people
Oh,
of
yeah.
East Palestine far outweighs their savings, and they're making themselves richer. It's greed.
It's greed.
It's definitely is greed. And, I think we do have bipartisan support for more regulation. We've been finally going in the right direction where we're pushing.
We have it right now because the fire is hot,
Yeah.
because of what happened in East Palestine. And as long as that stays in the public mind and the public eye, they'll make it happen,
So-
even in a bipartisan.
Right, so we are encouraged
Congress.
to call our elected representatives, our congressmen and our senators, to encourage them to push this
Yes.
legislation along, not only for the interests of the people in Ohio, but for the interests of people
Right.
here in Massachusetts and all over the country.
And part of what I would love to see in that bill is because I realize North Suffolk's responsible because of the failure of maintenance, but occasionally accidents do happen anyway, that there's something in the government agencies that will assist towns when these emergencies happen, not leave it up to the tender mercies of Norfolk Southern
Well,
to
we'll
do
bring them
so.
to court and
Well, that's what's going to happen. People are going to bring them to court in the end,
yeah,
but that takes so long. And they sometimes need help right away.
yeah. So maybe we're going to move a little bit further away now, looking at the economy in general. And Robert Reich has another couple of videos. The first one is going to be about debunking how we measure a successful economy. So why don't we watch that video?
In America, it's expensive just to be alive. And that's not just because of the pandemic. It's because of choices made by some of these, irregular Americans. Just look at how big oil is raking it in while you pay through the nose at the pump. Not sure about you, but I'll do just about anything to save fuel where I can. Go around. I'm driving slow because I'm saving gas. You don't like it? Go around. Go around. That's on top of the average price of a new non-luxury car, which is now over $44,000. I mean, even accounting for inflation, this is way higher than the average cost when I bought my first car. It's probably in a museum by now. Even worse, the median price for a house is now over $440,000. Compare that to 1972, when it was under $200,000. Work a full-time minimum wage job, you won't even be able to afford rent on a one-bedroom apartment just about anywhere in the United States. And when you get back after a long day of work, you'll likely be met with bills up the wazoo for doctor's visits, student loans, and utilities. So what's left of a paycheck after basic living expenses? And maybe not even those. You can only reduce spending on food, housing, and other basic necessities so much. Want to try covering the rest of your monthly costs with a credit card? Well, now that's more expensive too, with the Fed continuing to hike interest rates. All of this comes back to how we measure a successful economy. What good are more jobs if those jobs barely pay enough to live on? And what good are lots of jobs if they cause so much stress and take up so much time that our lives are miserable? And don't tell me a good economy is measured by a roaring stock market if the richest 10% of Americans own more than 80% of it. And what good is a large gross domestic product if more and more of the total economy is going to the richest 1%? In fact, what good is economic growth if the way we grow depends on fossil fuels that cause a climate crisis? These standard measures, jobs, the stock market, the GDP, they don't show how our economy is really doing, who is doing well, or the quality of our lives. People who sit at their kitchen tables at night wondering how they're going to pay the bills, they don't say to themselves, Well, at least corporate profits are at record levels. In fact, corporations have record profits, and CEOs are paid so much because they're squeezing more output from workers but paying lower wages. Over the past 40 years, productivity has grown nearly 4 times as fast as hourly pay. That's right, working Americans are getting paid less for being more productive than ever. Wish we could say the same about billionaires. At the same time, corporations are driving up the costs of everyday items people need. Because corporations are monopolizing their markets, they don't have to worry about competitors. A few giant corporations can easily coordinate price hikes and enjoy bigger profits. Just 4 firms control 85% of all beef, 66% of all pork, and 54% of all poultry production. Firms like Tyson have seen their profit margins skyrocket as they jack up prices higher than their costs, forcing consumers who are already stretched thin to pay even more. It's not just meat. Weak antitrust enforcement has allowed companies to become powerful enough to raise their prices across the entire food industry. It's the same story with household goods. Giant companies like Procter & Gamble, they blame their price hikes on increased costs, but their profit margins have soared to 25%. Hello? They care more about their bottom line than your bottom. Meanwhile, parents and even grandparents like me are still struggling to feed their babies because of a national formula shortage. Why? Largely because the 3 companies that control the entire formula industry would rather pump money into stock buybacks than quality control at their factories. Traditionally, our economy's health is measured by the unemployment rate, job growth, the stock market, overall economic growth. But these don't reflect the everyday kitchen table economics that affect our lives the most. These measures don't show the real economy. Instead of looking just at the number of jobs, we need to look at the income earned from those jobs. And not the average income. I mean, people at the top always bring up the average. If Jeff Bezos walked into a bar with 100 average working people, the average wealth of each person would suddenly be over $1 billion. No, look here at the median income, half above, half below. And make sure it accounts for inflation, that is real purchasing power. Over the last few decades, the real median income has barely budged. This isn't economic success, it's economic failure with a capital F. And instead of looking at the stock market or the GDP, we need to look at who owns what, where the wealth really is. Over the last 40 years, wealth has concentrated more and more at the very top. Look at this. This is a problem, folks, because with wealth comes political power. Forget trickle-down economics. It's trickle-on. And instead of looking just at economic growth, we also need to look at what that growth is costing us. Subtract the costs of the climate crisis, the costs of bad health, the costs of no paid leave, and all the stresses on our lives that economic growth is demanding. We need to look at the quality of our lives, all our lives. How many of us are adequately housed and clothed and fed? How many of our kids are getting a good education? How many of us live in safety or in fear? You want to measure economic success? Go to the kitchen tables of America.
Wow, that was,
Oh, definitely, it's a new way to look at it, and no, government doesn't look that, anytime you read an article in the Eagle, what does it focus on? The job unemployment rate and the GDP. It doesn't look at how people are living in the county, or
right.
they don't sit down and talk to people about their struggles to make the ends meet. A long time ago, I talked with my priest once, and I said, I miss the days when I could go in and buy what I wanted instead of what I needed, and I said that a decade ago. it certainly hasn't gotten to the point where I can go and buy what I want. It's still what I need,
Right. And
you know.
It's important to refocus how we measure things as a nation. And, well, there's another issue that he wants to talk about is that we always hear, no one wants to work anymore. Everybody wants to sit down on the rear end and do nothing. So he sort of addresses that in this next video.
I keep hearing no one wants to work anymore. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce, corporate America's biggest lobbying group, claims there are over 10 million job openings right now in the United States for which employers can't find workers. Federal Reserve, U.S. is dealing with a
structural labor shortage.
But here's the truth. There is no labor shortage. There is, however, a shortage of jobs paying sufficient wages to attract workers to fill them. When a problem is wrongly described, the solutions posed often turn out to be equally wrong. For most Americans, real inflation-adjusted wages continue to drop. Any pay increases workers may have earned in the past few years have actually been pay cuts because wages have lagged behind the rising costs of basic necessities like housing, food, childcare, and healthcare. Now, you don't have to be a financial wizard to see why some workers might say, the hell with it. So, what should be done about the difficulty employers are having finding workers? Simple. If employers want more workers, they should pay them more. Many corporations are raking it in right now. They can clearly afford to. Of course, Jerome Powell and his colleagues at the Fed don't want to hear this. They're aiming to deal with the so-called labor shortage by slowing the economy so much that employers can find all the workers they need without raising wages. But the Fed increasing interest rates to slow the economy will prevent millions of desperately needed raises and cause millions more to lose their jobs, disproportionately low-wage workers, women, and people of color. Meanwhile, Republicans and some corporate economists blame the labor shortage on overly generous unemployment benefits. They say the way to get more people into jobs is to make their lives outside jobs less tolerable. Rubbish! Most unemployed people are already hard up. Pandemic benefits are long over. And even before COVID, America's unemployment system was already the least generous of any rich nation. Taken to its logical extreme, the corporate Republican argument holds water only if you don't give a damn about workers. Sure, you could eliminate all safety nets, and at some point, people without jobs will hurt so much they'll have to take any available job at any wage, whatever it demands. But do this, and we'll end up with an economy that's even crueler than today's economy. Look, if we want more people to take jobs and we wish to live in a moral society where people can maintain decent lives, the answer is to pay people more. Instead of saying no one wants to work anymore, we should be saying no one wants to be exploited anymore.
That's an interesting concept, hey? No one wants to be exploited anymore.
No, we've been seeing that. I think
Yeah.
the time with COVID, when everybody sat home, gave reflection time on, was I really making it before COVID? And you came to the conclusion that you were. And did you want to go back to that treadmill, or did you want to try and change it? And I think the paradigm has shifted to people wanting it more to be in their favor, so that they want to do something they like or they enjoy, and they want to be fairly compensated for it. They'd rather open a small business and take the chances that way than go work for a corporation who's just probably barely paying a little above minimum wage at this stage. I mean, some of them have raised a little bit just to get people in, but they haven't gone like, oh, let's pay them $25 an hour to make it so that they can cover their costs of living.
Right, and make sure that everyone has health care.
Correct.
You know, let's
No,
have
we don't wanna
universal
do
health
healthcare.
care, take care of everybody. Let's set a minimum amount.
Standard for living.
Everyone gets paid sick leave, everybody gets vacation, everybody gets universal health care.
Care. That would be helpful.
And-
It would stabilize the economy amazingly if we
Right.
didn't have to deal
It
with
might affect those at the top, but they just, as Martin Luther King said, they just have to get used to getting richer.
a little
just
slower. Just a little
not-
slower.
Not as quickly as they used
It
to.
doesn't have to be a rocket to the moon.
Well, let's hope that we can have some changes in our economy. But right now, I want to take a step back, and I brought in the Berkshire Eagle from let's see where the date is on this thing.
It
I'll
was
just
2
have to-
weekends ago.
Yeah, this was on February 25th and 26th, but it's about John Olver. He delivered for us. You know, I don't know if you remember Congressman John Olver, but I do. And I considered him a friend. I considered him a friend to working
Fuck with
people. He considered himself a workhorse, not a show horse. And, you know,
Right.
like the issues that we're
He didn't
having-
make flashy speeches on.
the issues we're having with that Representative Santos, who lied about everything he ever did. I mean, I saw John Olver speak, I don't know how many times, and met him in person, and you never heard the obituary, what the obituary says. You never heard. Let's see if I can find it. That.
You never heard him. He'd always talk about his past when he was a teacher or things like that, but he never ever said.
Yeah,
He never put the spotlight on himself.
Yeah, he never talked about, like, he grew up on a farm in Beach Lake, Pennsylvania. He tended cows with his father while his mother ran a boarding house. He graduated from high school at 15 and from Rensselaer Polytechnical Institute at 18 and completed his master's degree in chemistry at Tufts with an MIT doctorate at age 24. You know, he never mentioned that he had his doctorate from MIT. I mean, imagine some of these politicians, you know, and how they vaunt, oh, I did this and I did that. John Oliver wouldn't even mention. I talked to people who knew him for a long time that never knew that he had his doctorate from MIT.
I never knew. I knew he worked at UMass Amherst in the
As a
chemistry department,
as a
but that was
professor.
about all I ever knew.
And his wife was a professor. I mean, it's just an amazing man, and he was very down to earth. I think the first time I met him, it was after Silvio Conte had passed away, and there was a bunch of Democrats that were running
for the seat,
the seat in Congress. And I had heard good things about John, and it just so happened when I was going down to the American Legion, I crossed paths with him as we were walking in. He also had parked over at the Heritage Park, and we were crossing the tracks together and talking. And I tried to explain to him that North Adams was not a Yankee town like most of the other towns in Western Massachusetts. So we were a more of a immigrant town.
Right.
And I really encouraged him to run, and I supported him, and he was a support to me. I know that just in the history, like when the lockout occurred with the Berkshire Gas Company, I tried to set up with our union and with other unions. We had a press conference down at the Berkshire Gas Company where the picket lines were, and then the following day we had a breakfast, a labor breakfast at that time it was St. John's Church. And John Oliver came. We invited him, and he came. And we had a round table, and John sat down, and we went around the room, and everybody that was there talked about where they came from in the labor movement, why they came to this breakfast, and how bad it was. And John sat there and listened, and then spoke to us, and he said, I wish I could have videotaped this and brought it to Congress for people to get information about this type of thing. But he stood with those gas workers. He was a strong ally of the working people. So
And he's a reflection of an era that's long gone in politics at this time, just like Jimmy Carter is a reflection of that.
Yeah.
Of the humbleness of a politician, not putting the emphasis on himself and putting it to his constituents. And I've admired John Oliver for his quiet gentleness, and it's the same quality with Jimmy Carter. And I've always thought he was the model of what to be of what an ex-president could and should be and could accomplish. He didn't just sit back there and say, "Oh, I was president for one term," and sat on his laurels. He went out, found issues that he cared about, and worked on them. And although I may not appreciate how Bill Clinton does it exactly, he followed that model to an extent, but he also did it to make some money. But he did find causes to focus on. And
well, I can remember
so forth.
In 1976, I was hitchhiking around the country, and that's when the primaries were taking place. And Jimmy Carter took an early lead in that. I was backing Fred Harris from Oklahoma, but
Yeah.
but Jimmy Carter seemed to be inevitable for it. I remember Governor Brown in California was mounting a late
Charge.
against him. I didn't know a lot about Jimmy Carter, but I knew that Cesar Chavez was endorsing
Governor Brown.
Governor Brown. So when I was hitchhiking, I had a Brown for president
On the
the
backpack.
bumper sticker on the back of my backpack. But you know, when Jimmy Carter won the nomination, I supported him as he was president. You know, I support him. He had some unfortunate things.
Happened.
He came out of the really criminal presidency of Richard Nixon, and he brought a model of decency and
Decency.
integrity to government. Unfortunately, a buzzsaw was running. He ran into a buzzsaw with the Iranian
Hostage
situation, with the fact that the oil prices
We're going
skyrocketing. The Russians had invaded Afghanistan. There were a bunch of things that happened during his presidency that didn't make for him
to be a second-term president.
getting a second term. And unfortunately, he didn't recognize that. And he ran for a second term. And Ted Kennedy ran against him. And I supported Ted Kennedy because I think Ted Kennedy could have beat Ronald Reagan, but I didn't think Jimmy Carter
could
have.
beat Ronald. Yeah.
I think that just the way things were.
Ronald Reagan had that megawatt TV
But
experience.
Jimmy Carter was what an inspiration after being president. I remember opening up the Christian Science Monitor and seeing him on the front page building houses for this group called Habitat for Humanity.
Yes.
That inspired me, so I learned about Habitat for Humanity. I brought that information to my church and started talking to ministers around town, and they told me to hook up with Reverend Bob Buckwalter in Williamstown because he's been talking about it. And we ended up, from that one thing, we ended up starting Northern Berkshire
Habitat
for
for
Humanity.
Humanity.
And what an inspiration he was. And then his for voting rights, the fact that he traveled to countries and observed voting,
Right.
and made sure that there was democracy throughout the world.
Yes.
And he's been a pillar. I mean, the greatest ex-president in the history of
I
the
still
United
think so,
States.
yes. I haven't seen anybody eclipse him.
Yeah, and he's in hospice care right now, so every time I think of him, I try to remember to say a prayer for a peaceful passing. I mean, he's been married for I don't know how many years, over 70 years.
Over
I
70
think.
years to Rosalind,
Yeah,
yes.
it's just a wonderful inspiration, and I
Yeah.
hope that we can look back on that, and I hope he looks back on his life as one that was a gift to the entire humanity.
I think he does. And so we ask everybody to say prayers for him for a peaceful passing and to remember him fondly. And we're coming down to 10 seconds on the show, so we're going to say power to
Power
the
to the
people.
people.
And we will see you next week.
There's power in a factory.